Tall Boy's Son. Chapter 1. Sol tripped on the walkway leading up to his ex-wife's house. He should have anticipated the crack in the pavement, but he'd been distracted by the holographic video playing in his palm. He fell. His personal interactive sailed from his hand, tumbling the ad for the space show through the humid morning air. Palm-sized starfighters arced in tight formations, armor gleaming, nose-mounted coil guns cracking. Then the PI hit the ground and the advertisement winked away. Sol belly flopped hard enough to knock his wind out, but there was no time to hurt. He scrambled forward to comb the dew-soaked grass for his PI. The rectangular device, smaller than a fun-sized chocolate bar, was merely water-resistant, and not so cheap that he could afford a new one. "Come on, come on," he muttered under his smog mask. He should have sprung for a sturdy belt buckle interactive or one of the ear studs that accepted gesture inputs from fashionable smart gloss nail polish. But no, Sol worked with his hands. He spotted the black device amidst the green and carefully plucked it from the grass. He rolled the PI against his shirt to dry it, then gave it a tentative shake. The advertisement sprang into the air, banners scrolling above dueling starships. "Tour of frigate-built Mk3 destroyer, including bridge access. Performances by the elite solar flare stunt team. 1 week only." Sol swiped. The holographic display switched to 3 splayed tickets, admittance to the space show for 1 adult and 2 kids. He swiped again. The tickets were replaced by a wing-bracketed medallion, a contestant badge for the Plutonium Cup tournament. He sagged with relief, but his heart was a drumming reminder that he wasn't as young as he used to be. 35 isn't that old," he told the concrete. "It is if you don't mind yourself well," his mother would have said. Sol ran his hands over each other, checking his fingers and wrists for tenderness. His palms burned from the slap of the fall, but everything else seemed okay. He could still manage a flight stick and throttle. The space show hosted an amateur pilot contest, a dogfight and simulation for the coveted Plutonium Cup, bragging rights, and 50,000 in cash. Sol pictured himself lifting the trophy, his ex-wife Kimberlyn throwing her arms around him while the kids latched onto his legs. It was a beautiful fantasy, and it filled him with a fire considerably more pleasant than the lingering acid burn of the hot sauce from last night's rice and beans dinner. If he didn't win, he wouldn't be able to make rent. There wasn't enough overtime at work. Maybe if he scored a hot find at the scrapyard, he might get by, but if not, he could end up on the streets, homeless and choking on smog. Kimberlyn could revoke his visitation rights. "Borrowing future trouble is weakness," his father would have said. Sol steadied himself with a variant of hook breathing, a technique pilots use to stay conscious during high-G maneuvers. The tang of polluted air slipped under his mask and puckered his tongue. He adjusted the expired air mask and stood with only a bit of difficulty. The horizon swam with dawn's citrus colors. Grizzled roach pigeons, adapted to harsh air, cooed from the power lines. Crabgrass besieged the sidewalk in front of a 2-story duplex. The roof was patched in a calico pattern of varying materials. The walls, Sol knew, let every sound through. He missed the place dearly. One more breath to push back the longing. Then he stepped up to Kimberlyn's door and rapped his knuckles across it. Inside, a child squealed. Someone was banging silverware. Dishes clattered, the refrigerator whooped open, then slammed shut. Sol knocked out her. "Honey, it's me. It's Sol." Footsteps approached, the latch slid, and the security mechanism beeped. The door, swollen with heat and sticky with humidity, screeched as Kimberlyn yanked it open. The door was the sturdiest part of the whole house, so airtight it could have kept the vacuum of space at bay. Kimberlyn brushed away a loose strand of hair and looked up at Sol, bewildered. Dimples pinned her cheeks, and the bright light turned her brown eyes to amber. Her blonde hair had been hastily tied back. She never wore it like that out of the house because her button ears stuck out. Sol loved those goofy ears. Kimber was still dressed for bed, faded pajama pants and one of Sol's baggy t-shirts. He wondered if she'd thought of him when she'd put it on. A lump rose in his throat. If he could prove himself at the space show and win some money for the family, maybe she'd give him the second chance he so desperately wanted. Kimberlyn squinted into the morning sun. Sol shifted his tall form to shade her eyes. One advantage of being built like an ogre was casting a large shadow. He smiled. "Hi, honey." "Sol, what are you doing here?" He waved the holographic tickets. "I'm here to pick up the kids. I bought tickets to the space show." Kimberlyn tilted her head and pursed her lips around an unspoken question. One of their children banged a spoon. She cast a glance into the house, then shook her head, free of distractions. "Have you been drinking? It's not your weekend," she hissed. The irritation and pity in her voice doused him in cold water. He started to gesture at his PI for the date. "I could have sworn. I promise, I'm sober." Kimberlyn's shoulders slumped. "You had the kids last weekend." Damn it, she was right. He scratched the back of his neck. A pleading whine slithered into his voice. "Kimber, babe, I'm sorry, but I've already got the tickets. I'll get the kids out of your hair. What do you say? It's going to be great. We're going to ride the elevator and everything." He had pleaded so much leading up to their divorce, he hated himself for not breaking the habit. Kimberlyn shook her head in refusal, but with a wobble that meant she was casting about for a reason. Advice from his father rose in his mind. "Make it seem like a win for the other guy." That advice was supposed to apply to business, not family. Not like Dad had ever made a distinction. Sol pulled his mask down and put on a grin that Kimberlyn had once called irresistibly cute. He said, "You'll have the kids off your back all day." She coughed in disbelief. "No, Sol. No. That's beside the point." He held on to his grin for dear life. "Honey, can you let it slide this one time? You used to let things slide." Her eyes snapped into focus. "No, I didn't. I kept track. Every time." "But—" He tried to get a word in. "But nothing. If I did let something slide, that was immaturity. I confront things head on now, like an adult. I've grown up." She snapped her mouth shut, leaving him to wonder if the question, "Have you?" was about to slip out. "Just this once. Please." His grin collapsed. He was pleading again. He couldn't help it. "The kids have Starspeak lessons," she stated plainly. And the refugees aren't from here." He barely stopped himself from using the pejorative pinheads. "Don't be like that. They make up 60% of the population." The urge to double down pulled Sol along its thorny, well-trod path. He knew the bitter, screaming fury at the end of that road. Yet he blurted out, "Only in the metro area." Kimberlyn turned to go back inside. "It's not even 8 a.m. I can't do this right now." Dangerous words lurked at the back of Sol's throat. He pulled in a deep breath and made an effort to strip the pleading from his tone. "Peace, peace. Please. I'll be good. I promise." He put his hand over his heart. Can I at least come in to say hi to the kids? Kimberlyn chewed her lip. Part of Sol wanted to fly away to some other planet where he couldn't foul up and hurt the people he loved just by existing. But he also wanted to be a good father and a good husband. I won't fight in front of the kids. I promised that before, and I've done it, haven't I? It wasn't much, but he clung to the accomplishment like a life preserver in choppy water. Sure, come in, she said, attempting a polite smile. But hide that. She pointed at the hologram where tiny starfighters with unrealistic contrails orbited the splayed tickets. Sol turned off the PI by closing his fist and pocketed the device. He followed Kimberlyn into the house, the door begrudgingly squeezed shut behind him. Daddy! Gav exclaimed as he and Kimberlyn entered the kitchen. The 7-year-old pitched toward Sol. The stool beneath him tilted dangerously. Sol rushed forward to avert disaster. He gave his big-headed boy a side hug and tousled his mop of brown hair. Hope, his little blonde girl, had been shoving food into her face. She took her fingers out of her mouth and spread her arms wide. Me too! It was important that if her older brother got a hug, she got one too. Sol hugged her. Little wet hands dabbed his shirt sleeve. She was a perfect mess. Sol beamed at his children. Hope had Kimberlyn's blonde hair. She wore her googly eye t-shirt, printed with tongue-out smiley face. One googly eye bounced as she wriggled in her booster chair. The other eye had fallen off, and Kimberlyn had drawn on a less dynamic replacement with permanent marker. Gav's hair was dark and would darken further, like his dad's. Gav wore kid jeans and a tight-fitting white t-shirt. He'd fixated on a cartoon about dinosaur construction workers who sported the style as they drove big trucks around, protecting Earth from giant evil rat men. Hope turned to her mother, confused. What about lessons? She asked. You still have lessons. Your daddy's just here to say hi. He has to leave soon. She shot Sol a look bright with the message, You do have to leave soon. Sol picked up the cue. That's right. I'm just stopping in. Ah, Hope whined. I don't want lessons. I want to go with Daddy. Gav pushed a breakfast bro biscuit around his plate as if it were a hovercraft. He commented, Last week Dad took us to the junkyard. Kimberlyn's voice dropped to a whisper, but both children were well within earshot. I thought we agreed that was dangerous. Sol winced and addressed the kids. That's right, we agreed. No more scrap trips. Gav frowned at his mother. He understood who was making the rules. Aw, come on. We'll do something else fun, I promise, Sol offered. Gav swiveled his big blue eyes toward his dad. Like what? Sol looked down to the PI in his breast pocket, but when he looked up, Kimberlyn had one eyebrow arched, and her stare was a fully charged disruptor beam. We'll think of something. There's nothing to do at Dad's place beside watch him play video games. That's boring, Gav whined. Kimberlyn frowned a question at Sol. He changed the subject. Why don't you teach me some of that star speak you've been learning? Back, 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 Hope chanted gleefully. Kimberlyn made a fierce face. Gav howled with laughter, crumbs spraying from his mouth. Sol looked around, confused. I'm missing something. It's a naughty word, Kimberlyn faced Gav, and I asked you not to encourage your sister to use it. If I hear that word out of her one more time, I'm taking away your PI privileges this afternoon. Gav's laughter turned to indignation. He pounded his fists on the table. "That's not fair!" Hope opened her mouth to speak. Devilish delight stretched across her cherubic cheeks. "No!" Gav shoved a biscuit in her mouth. Pandemonium erupted, full of shrieking and biscuit crumbs. It ended with laughter, though Sol figured that was due more to luck than clever parental tactics. Sol and Kimberlyn relocated both children to the living room before more mess could be made. Sol ended up with Gav on his lap, telling his son in his best fatherly voice, "Your sister looks up to you. You have to set a good example." It sounded like a good thing to say, though he felt like a slippery fraud as he said it. Gav fidgeted. Hope remembered her earlier complaint. "I don't like lessons. Teacher's stinky." "That's a very rude thing to say," Kimberlyn said sternly. Gav wrinkled his nose. "The aliens smell like glass cleaner." "They aren't aliens," Kimberlyn pointed out, but her reasonable observation was lost on her son. Sol made a show of sniffing Gav. "You're stinky, too." Tickles and shrieking ensued. Sol ran out of breath before his son got tired of the attention. He lifted Gav and set him on his feet. "Take your sister and go finish your breakfast," he instructed. "I don't want to." Gav clung to his shirt, then something caught the boy's eyes. He snatched the interactive out of Sol's pocket. "Can I play PI?" "That's Daddy's," Sol said, trying to keep his voice bland, but it was no use. Sol had a bad habit of distracting the kids by letting them mess with his PI whenever they got restless or acted out. Gav shook the PI. The space show advertisement flashed alive, as eager to receive attention as Gav was to give it. "Whoa," Gav crooned. "I want to go. Are we going?" "Not until later," Sol said. "Sol?" Kimberlyn warned. "Much later. Like when you're older. You can even see your dad fly one of those ships one day." Gav wrinkled his nose. "You're too old." "I am not," Sol protested, realizing too late that Gav was parroting words that had gotten an oversized reaction out of Sol the last time Kimberlyn had used them. "You're too old and Mommy won't let you," Gav said with a giggle. That hurt more than Sol wanted to admit. He replied, "Mommy won't let you either. Not unless you and your sister finish breakfast. Now give back Daddy's PI." "Can I keep this?" Gav asked. "Sure." Gav closed a fist over the hologram and pitched it toward the ceiling, copying the advertisement to the house network. Then he returned the PI and led his sister to the kitchen. Sol and Kimberlyn were alone. Sol on the fold-out sofa, Kimberlyn on the shabby recliner. "They learn so fast," he mused, considering both Gav's mastery of the gesture interface and his son's readiness with words that exposed Sol's deep-held inadequacies. "I wish you hadn't done that," Kimberlyn said softly, eyes on the steaming mug she held. "Done what?" "Let him copy the ad. It's all he'll talk about for days." Her tone didn't suggest an argument. He needed to do his part to steer clear of a fight. He teased back. "I noticed the new food printer in the kitchen. I recall you saying, and I quote, 'Those things print out bland, processed crap, and I will never have one in my house.'" She looked up from her mug. A smile curled her lips, like she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar, but had already eaten the cookie. "It's really convenient." He chuckled. She went on. "You wouldn't believe. Just pour the powder in, let the kids choose the color and shape. There are flavor options, too." She threw her head back against the recliner. "That's how they get you. The flavor packs cost a fortune." Sol laughed harder. Kimberlyn smiled, but tension crimped the corners of her eyes. I appreciate you understanding. Sol was taken aback. About what? I don't know. The food printer, the expense of it. Work's been stressful. It's fundraising season. If I don't hit my targets, the nonprofit goes under. I can't help anyone, and I don't get a paycheck. If you can call what I earn a paycheck. She let out a massive sigh. I don't have the energy to fight with our picky eaters. Did she want him to offer her money above the usual? He literally could not. He'd spent everything on the space show tickets and entry fee for the Plutonium Cup tournament. If there's a way I could help, he floundered. Maybe house repairs? How's the new filter working? Great. Thanks for replacing that. Gav's cough cleared up. Clean air will do that. It will, Kimberlyn agreed. A lull descended. Sol tried his luck. I could still take the Hellions off your hands today. The kids could miss lessons this one time. Kimberlyn's smile cracked. No, and don't make me the bad guy. Sol surrendered, hands up. I didn't say anything bad about the lessons. You didn't say anything good either. She inhaled, shoulders lifting and falling, as if bracing herself. Sol felt defenses rising on both sides. She said, Piloting is your dream, not theirs. Gav loves space stuff. He memorized basic controls on half a dozen ships. To what end, Sol? Those jobs are dangerous and low paying. Our kids deserve more. They aren't all low paying. Kimberlyn didn't seem to hear. She tilted her head toward the kitchen where the kids were making enough noise not to be suspicious, but not so much that they might be breaking something. She said, You want to do that damned contest, don't you? Sol tensed. His hand squeezed the flesh above his knees. It hurt. There was swelling from his fall. He spoke louder than he meant to. Yeah, I do. And I've got a real shot at it. I've got my half-clover strike under a second with 90% accuracy. Kimberlyn softened her tone as if cajoling a stray puppy out from under a car. Every year the winner is a guy half your age. Some amateur, she made air quotes, sponsored by energy infusers. Not this year. Kimberlyn spoke gently, but through gritted teeth. Listen to yourself. I've been practicing. So I hear. What's this about the kids watching you play games? That was one time. Heat rose up his neck. Had she been setting this trap? When something seems malicious, look for alternative explanations. That's what the marriage counselor had said. Sure, no problem. And after that, he'd invent cold fusion and bring peace to the Middle East. Kimberlyn's voice rose. You had the kids for the weekend, and you just sat around playing video games. Pressure coiled Sol's chest. He should have backed down, should have apologized, or simply kept his mouth shut. Louder, he repeated, One time. Kimberlyn rolled her neck and looked to the ceiling as if searching for grace. She lowered her voice, a peace offering, or so Sol told himself. I know you like those games. His blood pressure spiked. So condescending. She's not trying to hurt me. He insisted to himself. He ground his teeth and managed to make an I statement. I know it was a mistake. It won't happen again. He desperately wanted to avoid getting sucked into an argument in front of the kids. All I want is one win, but I'm a failure at every turn. He shook his head. But on that point of me and the kids, I can't take them next weekend. The farm has me working overtime. It wasn't true yet, but it would have to become true. We needed the money. Kimberlyn kept her voice low, but her frustration was clear. Sol, that really throws a wrench in my plans. You can't tell them no? He showed empty palms. Look, there's what I give to you and the kids. Plus rent's gone up. And it's not like I'm in great standing at work. They're looking for any excuse to downsize. Kimberlyn closed her eyes. What did you do? He bristled. Why would you assume I did something? But he knew it was because of how he'd gotten fired from his last job. And that job had been a dream. Or if not a dream, at least a starship. But management had gotten sick of telling him that he couldn't fly a tub designed for sucking up space debris like it was a starfighter. And Kimberlyn had been plagued by worry. Space is a dangerous place, she'd been keen on reminding him. She sipped from her mug, then said, You're right. That was unfair. I'm sorry. It's all right, Sol replied. A young voice shouted, No! From the other room. Both parents swiveled their heads, but there was no dramatic follow-up. Sol returned his eyes to Kimberlyn, her dimples, bed hair, and pajamas. The sense that everything was as it should be surged through him. Kimberlyn's presence was comforting. She believed in Sol's best self. Despite their flaws and occasional friction between them, they belonged together. He was certain. Hey, we didn't fight, he pointed out encouragingly. Not in front of the kids, Kimberlyn admitted. Not at all. I guess you're right. Let me say bye. I'll get out of your hair. Kimberlyn's brow furrowed even as her mouth smiled. You're not in my hair. Sol stood to hide the tears suddenly stinging his eyes. His father had said, Never let them see you cry. He blinked and dabbed his shirt sleeve to his face. They returned to the kitchen where Gav was enacting battles for Hope with his printed food shapes. Hope seized each new bit of damage and shoved it into her mouth. Sol pinched a starfighter-shaped biscuit and flew it through the air. Did I tell you about the time I slip-drifted under the gun horizon of a battlecruiser and disabled it in one pass? Yes, Gav shouted, grabbing for the food. In a game? Kimberlyn asked, arms folded across her chest. She knew the answer. Ouch, Sol reacted, but in a playful tone. He dipped the wings of the food ship. Oh no! The mothership's coil guns are too strong! I'm going down! Sol crashed the biscuit into Gav's mouth. He gobbled it up. All right, I'm headed out, kiddos. Sol squeezed Hope to his chest and tousled Gav's hair. I love you, Daddy, the children chimed, out of sync. I love you, too. Don't forget Mommy, Hope said, pointing at Kimberlyn. I love you, honey. He thought it sounded sincere. He meant it, but it was a different love than when they'd been younger and freer. I love you, too, Kimberlyn replied. Sol wondered what the words meant to her. He put on his air mask and went out the front door without tripping on the crack in the pavement. It wasn't quite the win he was looking for. He wiped his eyes with the backs of his hands before turning toward the bus stop. He reflected that he hadn't fought very hard for the space show. Piloting didn't seem to matter as much when he was with his family. With only the pill-shaped shuttle buses bouncing over broken streets for company, it mattered again. So, get a win. Dad was always talking about wins. Get that one big win that renders all the losses meaningless, he'd say. Today was the day for Sol to put his skills to the test. He was an underdog, but a lot of people performed best under pressure. That's me. That's the kind of person I am. But the mantra was slimy with a film of doubt. The bus stop consisted of a bench behind a wind-hassled shelter. Dust devils s- stirred single-use infuser wrappers around his. Sol was sure most of the infusers had been used to spritz caffeine or nicotine. He was also sure that a few had been used for harder drugs. Broken glass littered the ground. He recognized the brand of a beer bottle from the weathered label holding together fragments. It was one of his favorites. Shame knifed between his ribs. He countered. At least I don't trash up public spaces when I'm drunk. But the shame stabbed deeper. An older woman sat on the far end of the bus stop bench. Sol made sure to walk up slowly, in her line of sight. He was a big guy, and he didn't want to make her nervous. The woman wore a light shawl over a flowery yellow dress. She had a cheap, disposable mask like Sol's. Her tall, alien head was moderately well disguised by the puff of her hair, but she'd used a cheap dye. The brown didn't look entirely natural, and even through his mask it smelled like a mixture of ammonia and gasoline. Gav was right. The aliens did smell funny. The more they tried to blend in, the more they stuck out. Sol scolded himself, hearing Kimberlin's voice. They aren't aliens, they're refugees. Sol studied the woman out of the corner of his eye. She was tall. A lot of the newer refugees were hunched by their inexperience with persistent gravity. She was either compensating or she'd been on Earth for most of her life. She was perfectly human, just a little different looking. Not even that many generations distant from Earthlings like Sol. The scientists said wasn't enough time for evolutionary adaptation to occur. Nonetheless, the developmental changes were obvious. He turned his attention to the sky with its melted butter dawn and thought about the space show. He could still fly in it. He could win. With the slightest imaginative effort, he could feel a starfighter stick and throttle in his hands. He went through a series of maneuvers in his mind, keeping his hand motions slight so the woman wouldn't think he was crazy. I can get the only win that matters. But that was his father speaking. When Sol thought of the only win that mattered, he thought of erasing the pain and disappointment from Kimberlin's eyes. And that was a decision made. Plus, there was nothing more pathetic than going to the show by himself. A washed-up, not even has-been, pining after an imagined past as the future slipped away. The sensible thing to do would be to scalp the tickets and get some money back. Another refugee woman approached. She was closer to Sol's age and had 2 kids in tow. Sol stood and offered his seat. The woman averted her eyes and waved him off. I insist, he said. The other woman translated his words into star speak. The newcomer bowed, said something under her breath, and took his seat. The translator said, She thanks you, in the sticks and leaves rasp of the pinhead accent. The 2 children, oblivious to any awkwardness between the adults, chased each other around the bench with toy starships. The name Gilbert Bain popped out from their otherwise unintelligible words. Sol smiled, imagining the kids were arguing over who got to play the role of the infamous villain. Many aspiring fighter jockeys idolized Bain. Sol had often fantasized about either being the ace or shooting him down, depending on how patriotic he'd been feeling at the time. Now it all felt like an idle fantasy. He pulled out his PI and produced the 3 holographic tickets to the space show. A glowing green halo indicated that they were being offered. She can have them, Sol said to the woman who had translated. The translator spoke to the mother. The mother waggled her head and replied with ticking sounds. Really? I mean it, Sol said, looking at her kindly. More wispy, scratching sounds passed between the refugee women. The children kept circling, plastic starships rolling and diving at the ends of their outstretched arms. The mother swept her wrist through the hologram. The tickets winked over to the PI hidden amongst one of her many bangles. She glanced around anxiously as if this might be some sort of prank. A camera crew ready to jump out of the bushes and document pinhead greed. Sol caught her eye and dipped his chin in a small bow. "Thank you," she said in English. A grain of weight lifted from Sol's shoulders.